Both my husband's mistress and I were pregnant, and his mother decided only one of us deserved to stay. And when she made that decision, she didn't cry. She didn't apologize. She sat down at her own dining room table, folded her hands like she was about to say grace, and told us, calm as a woman reading a grocery list, that whoever gave birth to a boy would be allowed to stay. The mistress smiled. My husband looked at the floor, and I looked at that woman, the one who had called me daughter for 4 years, and understood in one single breath that I had never actually been in this family at all. I didn't scream. I didn't break a single dish. I stood up, walked out through her front door, and filed for divorce 4 days later. What happened 7 months after that, in a hospital waiting room filled with blue balloons, was something none of them saw coming. And I want to tell you every single detail. My name is Selene, and I grew up in a mid-sized town in central Ohio where everyone knew your last name before they knew your face. My father, Harlan, spent 30 years repairing heavy equipment for the county. Quiet man. Steady. The kind of father who fixed things without being asked and never once made you feel like asking was a burden. My mother, Marlis, taught 4th grade for 26 years and believed, with her whole chest, that how you treat people when no one is watching is the only version of character that counts. I was raised to work hard and mean what I say. So when I married Colt Archer at 27 in a small ceremony at a riverside venue outside Columbus, I meant every word of that. Colt was charming in the way that feels like warmth before you realize it's actually just light, bright on the surface, no real heat underneath. He was funny at parties, good with first impressions. His mother, Viveca, had raised him alone after his father left when Colt was 12, and she carried that sacrifice like a debt she intended to collect from every woman who came near her son. She tolerated me. That is the most honest word I can use. Not welcomed. Not embraced. Tolerated. There were small signs from the very beginning, the kind that polite women are trained to explain away. Viveca corrected how I loaded the dishwasher at her house. She brought up Colt's ex-girlfriend at Thanksgiving, once, then twice, then with increasing detail, as if she were building a case. She scheduled family dinners on dates I had already mentioned were important to me, then looked genuinely puzzled when I was disappointed. I made peace with all of it, because I loved Colt, or I loved the version of Colt I had convinced myself was the real one. For 3 years, we were fine in the way that things can be fine when both people agree not to look too closely. Then, in the spring of our 4th year, things began to shift in ways I couldn't explain away anymore. It started with his phone. Not in a dramatic, obvious way. Colt was too careful for that. It was subtler. He began taking calls in the garage. He started responding to texts with his screen angled away from me. He came home from late client meetings smelling like a restaurant I hadn't been to. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself this because I wanted to, because the alternative, the thing sitting at the back of my mind like a door I hadn't opened yet, was too heavy to carry without proof. Then I found out I was pregnant. The morning I took the test, the bathroom was cold and gray outside the window, and my hands were shaking so badly I had to set the little white stick on the edge of the sink and step back from it. When the 2 lines appeared, I sat on the floor with my back against the bathtub and pressed both hands flat against my stomach. For exactly 1 foolish, hopeful second, I thought, maybe this is the thing that brings us back together. That thought did not last long. 3 weeks later, I found out about Bryn. Not through a confession. Not through any kindness or honesty on Colt's part. I found a receipt in his truck, a pharmacy on the other side of town, a brand I recognized. I found a series of messages on his phone, time-stamped in the hours he had claimed to be working. And then, the piece that made everything real and permanent and impossible to explain away, a photo Bryn had sent from a clinic waiting room, her hand resting on her stomach, and a message beneath it that read, "Our turn, finally." She was pregnant. My husband had made another woman pregnant. And from the timestamp on that photo, she was further along than I was. When I told Colt what I had found, he did not deny it. That, in its own terrible way, was almost worse than if he had. A denial would have given me something to fight against. His silence, the way he sat on the edge of our bed and stared at his hands, Felt like a confession that hadn't even bothered to dress itself up as remorse. I asked him what he planned to do. He said he needed time to think. I asked him if Bryn knew about me. He said yes. I asked him if she knew I was pregnant. He looked up at me then, and in his eyes I saw something I had never seen there before. Not guilt, not grief, but calculation. He was already sorting us. Already deciding which version of his life was easier to keep. For days after that conversation, Viveca called a family meeting. She said she wanted to get everyone in the same room and talk through things like adults. I went because I still believed at that point that adults were what we were going to be. Her house smelled the way it always did on a Saturday. Pot roast in the oven, lemon oil on the wood furniture, old carpet warmed by afternoon sun coming through the curtains. An American flag hung outside her front door and snapped softly in the wind every time someone pushed through. Bryn was already there when I arrived. She sat across from me in a cream-colored sweater, one hand resting on her stomach, her chin lifted in the particular way of someone who has already been told they are winning. Viveca sat at the head of the table. Colt's younger sister, Dara, stood near the china hutch and looked everywhere except at me. Colt's father, long remarried, rarely present, sat at the far end of the table studying the salt shaker like it contained the answers to questions no one had asked him. Viveca looked at both of us and said, without blinking, "Whoever gives birth to a boy stays. That's how this gets resolved. If neither of you has a boy, you can both find your own way." The room went completely still. Not the kind of still that comes before an argument. The kind that comes when something has been said that everyone understands is real, and no one wants to be the first to acknowledge what it means. I looked at Colt. He was looking at his hands again. He had known. He had sat in that car and driven to his mother's house knowing exactly what she was going to say, and he had brought me there anyway. He had let me walk through that door and sit at that table and hear those words come out of his mother's mouth, and he had not warned me, had not stopped it, had not looked up. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I stood up from that table, wrapped both hands around the front of my coat where my stomach was just beginning to show, and walked out of Viveca's house through the front door while the flag snapped and popped behind me in the afternoon wind. I drove home. I called my mother, and that night, sitting on the bathroom floor of her house, the house I had helped choose, helped furnish, helped make into something that felt like a home, I made a decision. 4 days later, I was at the family court intake desk at 9:15 in the morning. The clerk had kind eyes and a stamper she used with the practiced efficiency of someone who had seen every version of this particular morning. She slid the packet across the counter, pointed to the tabs, and asked once, gently, if I was sure. I cried when I signed my name, but I did not stop writing. The divorce petition, the separation agreement, the financial disclosure forms. I kept copies of everything and not just the legal documents. The pharmacy receipt. The screenshots from Colt's phone. The photo from Bryn's clinic appointment. Every piece of paper that documented what had been done to me went into a blue accordion folder with my name written on the tab in black marker. Not for revenge. For record. Because I had already learned that people rewrite the pain they cause, and paper does not forget the way they hope you will. Colt did not contest anything. I think part of him was relieved. The divorce was finalized within 60 days. I took my name back, my savings, and the small inheritance my grandmother had left me that I had kept in a separate account. One of the few quiet decisions I'd made in that marriage that turned out to matter. I moved into an apartment across town. Second floor, thin walls, a laundry room that smelled like warm fabric and someone else's dryer sheets, a mailbox that stuck if you pulled too quickly. It was nothing like the house I'd left. It was entirely mine. My father, Harlan, drove over the first Saturday with his toolbox and assembled the crib without being asked, tightening every screw until his knuckles went white, not saying much, which was the way Harlan showed love. My mother, Marlis, filled my refrigerator and labeled every container with masking tape and a marker, the same way she had labeled my school lunch bags for years. I went back to work. I went to every doctor appointment. I paid my rent. I learned to sleep through the thin walls and the unfamiliar sounds of a building that was not mine yet. And meanwhile, across town, Bryn moved into Viveca's house. Word reached me the way it always does in situations like this, sideways, through people who weren't trying to hurt me but couldn't quite help sharing. A cousin mentioned a photo from a gender reveal. A neighbor of Viveca's said something at the grocery store. Colt's sister Dara sent a single text, "I want you to know I think this is wrong," and then went silent, which I understood. She had her own life inside that family to protect. What I pieced together was this. Viveca had thrown Bryn a shower. Blue balloons. Blue blankets. Blue ribbon on every gift. The photos showed Viveca beaming at the head of the table the way she had never beamed at anything I had done in 4 years of trying. A Colt stood in the background of every picture with the expression of a man who has made peace with something he knows is wrong because it is easier than admitting it. They were certain. Viveca had chosen Bryn. Bryn was carrying the boy. The family line would continue. Everything had resolved itself neatly, the way Viveca liked things to resolve, with her at the center of the outcome. I told myself I didn't care. I told myself that enough times, in enough different moods, that it started to become true in the parts of my life that actually mattered. 7 months after I walked out of Viveca's dining room, I gave birth to my daughter. She came into the world on a Tuesday morning, small and warm and wrinkled, with a forehead that furrowed immediately as if she were already forming opinions about things. The hospital bracelet was too big for her ankle. She opened her eyes once, just briefly, and the look she gave the room felt, in the completely irrational way of new mothers, like recognition. Like she already knew my voice. My mother, Marlis, cried into a paper coffee cup and didn't try to hide it. My father, Harlan, stood by the window with his arms crossed and wiped his face with the back of his hand, and then looked out at the parking lot for a long moment as if the parking lot had been the one to move him. No one in that room asked whether she was enough. She was breathing. She was here. She was mine. I named her Pemberley, Pem, for the first few years, until she decided for herself what she wanted to be called. An old name. A quiet name. A name that belonged to no one else in our family and would be entirely hers. In the days that followed, I learned to nurse in the dark. I learned the difference between her hungry cry and her startled cry. I learned to fold my exhaustion into the background of every hour and keep moving anyway. I did not think about Colt. I thought about Pem. 2 weeks after Pem was born, I was folding laundry on the couch. Tiny onesies, small socks that looked like they couldn't possibly fit a real person, when my phone lit up with a message from Dara. I almost didn't open it. Then a second message came. Then a third. Then a photo. I set down the onesie in my hands and looked at the screen. The photo was taken in a hospital corridor. Blurry at the edges the way phone photos get when hands are shaking. In the background, the blue balloons Viveca had brought, the ones someone had tied to a chair with curling ribbon, were on the floor. Not floating. On the floor. Viveca was sitting in a chair with both hands pressed over her mouth, her face the color of old paper. Colt was standing at the intake counter, white-faced, staring at something a nurse had placed in front of him. Dara's message read, "The baby isn't his." DNA request was filed at the hospital before discharge. Bryn admitted it in the delivery room. She came clean right there. Selene, she had been involved with someone else the entire time. That baby does not belong to Colt. I read the message 3 times. Then I set the phone down on the couch cushion beside a stack of folded onesies and looked across the room at Pem's bassinet, where my daughter was sleeping with both fists curled against her cheeks. The blue balloons were on the floor. The boy Viveca had been certain about, the grandson she had rearranged her entire family for, the child she had chosen over me, the reason she had looked me in the eye at her own dining room table and told me I was replaceable, did not belong to her son. He never had. The details came in pieces, the way they always do when something large collapses. Bryn had been involved with another man throughout her relationship with Colt, someone she had known for years before Colt entered the picture, someone she had never fully ended things with. When she discovered she was pregnant, she had believed it was Colt's. But in those final weeks, doubt had set in. And when the baby arrived and she saw his face, a face that clearly echoed someone else, she made the decision, right there in the delivery room, to tell the truth before anyone else figured it out. Whether that decision came from conscience or fear of the worst alternative, I couldn't say. But she said it. And once it was said, there was no version of that hospital room that could go back to what it had been an hour before. Colt requested a formal paternity test. The result confirmed what Bryn had already admitted. The child was not his. Viveca did not speak publicly about what had happened. She did not issue any kind of statement to the family. From what Dara told me over the following weeks, the house went very quiet. The way houses go quiet when the story that held them together has been pulled out from underneath. Colt moved out of Viveca's house within a month. He was not, it turned out, as central to Viveca's vision as I had always assumed. Without the boy, without the continuation of the family line she had scripted in her mind, the entire arrangement lost its purpose. Bryn left shortly after. The blue nursery Viveca had prepared sat empty. I found this out, and I felt not triumphant. Tired, mostly. And clear. What most people didn't know, what I hadn't shared with anyone outside my attorney, was that the blue folder I had assembled at the beginning of all this had not simply sat in a drawer. My attorney, a methodical woman named Cecily Voss who wore reading glasses on a chain and spoke in the kind of measured sentences that made opposing counsel nervous, had been building something with those documents for months. The pharmacy receipt, the time-stamped messages, the clinic photo with its date and metadata intact, the record of Colt's financial behavior in the 6 months before I filed, including 3 transfers to an account I had not been informed of, which violated the financial disclosure requirements of our joint accounts under Ohio marital law. Cecily had filed a motion for financial discovery that Colt's attorney had initially dismissed as a formality. It was not a formality. What the discovery process uncovered was a pattern. Colt had been redirecting funds from our joint household account into a private account for 11 months before I filed. Some of those funds had gone toward expenses that were not household expenses. The documentation was detailed. The amounts were significant. The original settlement I had signed gave me my savings, my grandmother's inheritance, and a modest monthly support figure based on our disclosed joint income. The amended settlement, finalized 4 months after our original divorce, after Cecily's motion worked its way through the system, reflected the full picture. I am not going to list numbers here because money is not the point. The point is that Viveca's dining room table, that Saturday afternoon, with the pot roast in the oven and the blue flag snapping outside, was not the end of anything. It was the last moment those people had any real power over my life. Every decision I made after that door closed behind me was mine. The filing, the folder, the apartment, Pem's name, the attorney who wore her glasses on a chain and did not dismiss a single document I handed her. I built the next chapter with what they left behind, which turned out to be more than enough. Pemberley is 2.5 now. She has strong opinions about the color of her cups and an absolute conviction that dogs, all dogs, everywhere, regardless of size, are her personal friends. She says, actually, before statements she considers especially important, which is most of them. She has her grandmother Marlis's eyebrows and her grandfather Harlan's absolute unwillingness to let anything go unexamined. She does not know the story I have just told you. Not yet. Not for many years. What she does know is that her mother shows up. Every morning. Every hard night. Every small moment that doesn't feel significant until you look back at it and realize that's what a life is made of. My apartment has become something that feels more every day like a home I chose rather than one I was assigned. I have a job I'm good at. I have my parents close by. I have a circle of people, not large but solid, who knew me before all of this happened and liked me anyway. Colt and I do not speak, except through the parenting arrangement our attorneys put in writing. He has visitation. He uses it. There is no warmth there, but there is structure, and structure is something Pem can rely on even if warmth takes longer to build. Viveca has not reached out. I did not expect her to. I think about that dining room table sometimes, not with anger anymore, or not only with anger. Mostly I think about the moment I stood up. Because I almost didn't. There is a version of that afternoon where I stay seated, where I swallow what Viveca said and tell myself it was just words, where I look at my husband and decide that half a marriage is better than starting over from nothing. That version of me is not here. The version of me who stood up, who walked out through that door, and kept walking until she reached a courthouse, and then an apartment, and then a delivery room, and then a life that was entirely her own. That's the one who stayed. And she is still standing. So tell me, if someone handed you an ultimatum designed to make you feel like you had no options, would you stay seated, or would you be the one to stand up first?